Welcome back to the Rain Race podcast. I'm your host, GT Rain, dressed up looking like a night shift security guard tonight, but that's not what we're here for. We're instead here to talk about the Rolex 24 at Daytona and everything that happened in that very dramatic, unpredictable, and all-out crazy race. Of course, joined alongside my co-host for this wonderful podcast, still enjoying the warmth of Florida, off in the Esses, Stu. What you doing down there right now?
Well, we spent a day at Universal, so trying to make the most of our time in the warmer weather. But I am pleased to see that everybody got the dark shirt, dark hat memo that we didn't put out for this. Where it's good to see that we're all matching for this evening's show.
Yeah, well, we try our best here. And that leads us on to our next guest here, and the first guest for a long time on this podcast. Formula Jonah, how are you doing tonight? Thank you very much for joining us on the Rain Race podcast.
Well, Chris and Stu, thanks so much for having me here. I really appreciate coming on this and you guys allowing me to be a part of this podcast for this evening. And yeah, I'm doing great. Really excited to get into what we have in store today when it comes to the Rolex 24 at Daytona. We got a lot to talk about, and just really excited.
Yeah, definitely no shortage of that. If you're new to this podcast, of course, it being live, it means two things. Number one, we're going to be prone to some mistakes potentially. Number two, we have a live chat box that you can drop some questions in, and we will try to get to as many of those throughout the episode as we can. Sure, a lot of you are going to have questions related to this race and everything IMSA after the very long week that we had last week and some of the news that we got out of Daytona. I want to start things off here, guys. Of course, we're going to spend the majority of this episode recapping the race. And I think if there's one single word I would use to describe the race this year, if it's not dramatic, would be definitive. I think this was a definitive race across the board. It was a definitive race for the GTP class, for some of the manufacturers in that class that we're finally seeing better results out of. A definitive race for GTD Pro, which I think really started to hit its strides here and showed its true potential for maybe the first time after its introduction a good 3 years ago now. I don't know. That's how I would describe this race. Stu, I'm going to start things off with you. I want to hear, a couple thoughts from you specifically being at the race this year, what you really thought of the Rolex 24 at Daytona.
Yeah, I feel like we've been having this conversation for a while now, is that, every year it seems like everything's getting bigger and bigger and, a larger crowd than we've ever seen. That definitely reflected in this year's race. There was a huge crowd there once again for Sunday. And then the action that we were treated to on track was pretty incredible. Everybody's going to talk about the GTD Pro battle, especially in the closing hours of that race. But I mean, the battle that was brewing for the, more than the second half of the race, the entire final 12 hours or longer of that race, it felt like the top cars in GTD Pro were, nose to tail for essentially the entire time. But I mean, it was a breakout race for GTD Pro, I feel like, but I think it's because it's been slept on just a little bit in recent years. Like we've had some iconic races in GTD Pro, like dating back to last year. We had that finish at Sebring between Reese and Vassar Sullivan. That's the first one that comes to mind, but there's been other ones as well. We had the FAF and it's a KPMG, was it?
KCMG.
That other portion. KCMG.
No,
I'm thinking of,
yeah.
that's like what is that? That's a consultant group, KPMG, I think. Yeah, I mean, like GTD Pro, big breakout for them. It's good to see some of the people that were maybe hesitant about the GTD Pro class replacing GTLM. It's good to see them coming around and, drawing those parallels to the GTLM class and the battles that we saw there so many years. But I think looking beyond that, you look at the other classes that we had, and GTD or GTP, if there was another 5 minutes in that race, we could be talking about a finish, in a similar sort of light that we saw in GTD Pro. Like Blomqvist was catching the 7 at the end of that race, and just a few more laps, it would have been interesting to see how that would have unfolded. Even in GTD, like AWA came on in the final few hours, but throughout that entire race, the battle that we saw brewing, so many good cars led significant chunks of that race. And I think that, the sport as a whole is in a really healthy spot right now. And it was kind of very evident throughout the entire weekend. Fan turnout was great as always, or as it has been, in recent years. But the on-track performance that we got was very impressive, and across so many manufacturers as well. I don't know if there's a single manufacturer that was on the grid in any of the classes that didn't have a legitimate, some of them may have been a little bit more remote than others. I'll acknowledge that, but they all had a very legitimate shot to win that race. And I don't know if we could have said that about very many races in the past, maybe ever, that there's, or in recent memory, where there's been, like, every manufacturer has had a realistic shot at the win.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I thought about myself, leaving that race, is just how competitive it was across the board in all of the classes. But Jonah, I want to give you a couple minutes here as well, just some of your quick takeaways from Daytona. Oh, I can't hear you.
Oh,
there we go.
Good. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a lot of takeaways. I think the Rolex 24 Daytona was absolutely brilliant. As Stu pointed out just a moment ago, there was so much competition, so much action, and it was, in my opinion, one of the best races we've seen in IMSA for the last couple of seasons. And yeah, I think there's a lot to talk about. But first,
Yep. Oh no!
Oh, we had a hiccup.
Yeah, a little hiccup there. It looks like you're back.
Okay, I'm good. All right.
Yep.
I'm not sure maybe it's my internet connection or something like that. But yeah, where I was.
Oh. The joys of a live show. I'll tell you what.
You know what? I had some technical difficulties tonight too. So I mean, when am I not having technical difficulties? Right? It's.
Can you see me now?
I see. Jonah was blinking. So.
Yep. I think you're good now.
Okay. Hopefully it's all good. If not, I can reset and try and come back. Apologies for the technical difficulties. It wouldn't be a stream without it, I guess, for me. But yeah, when it comes to GTP, BMW, I think we got to talk about them. I mean, the pace that they showed was absolutely incredible. And over the last few races of the Rolex 24 that I've seen, BMW wasn't really as competitive as they were. And I think this is the first race where we really saw those four manufacturers, Acura, Cadillac, Porsche, and BMW, all with a realistic chance of winning. And you guys just pointed it out.
Yeah, it cut off a little bit again there.
Man.
I'll run with this point because I think this is a good place to start here while we wait for the recovery there. You talk about how strong BMW was, and that was very apparent even starting at the Roar. I mean, Stu, you and I were on the last episode, and we were talking about how strong BMW was, and we were like, I don't want to read into it too much. It's Roar testing. There's nothing really on the line this weekend anymore. Is it real true pace? And we didn't have to go long into the weekend to realize that, yes, this was a true competitive spirit from BMW. And this is something that we saw out of them at the end of last season. They really started to hit a stride, especially Indianapolis last year, Petit Le Mans. They were really showing more performance than they were at previous races. Qualifying, Dries Van Tor puts down a pole-setting lap in the 24 BMW, really sets the precedent for where that car can be. That was the first pole position for that car in IMSA. We saw him put that car on provisional pole last year at Le Mans as well. Of course, with the Hyperpole top, 8 shootout last year. Didn't result in an actual official pole position in that race, but still, we finally saw in IMSA what that car is capable of. And what is capable of, at least at Daytona, was a lot. And that's a huge turnaround from where they were a couple of years ago, where this was really a race of just survive for BMW. No, they were really there as a top contender this race.
Yeah, I fully agree. BMW had strong pace. I think that all four of the brands had strong pace. And what was super unfortunate for me was that Lamborghini wasn't up there. You know, we had that SC63 finally here at the Rolex 24. I thought that this could be a breakthrough for them, that they could finally maybe get in the fight just a tiny bit, even with just getting into a position where they could fight for the top five. But to see them end their race with that overtaking.
Yeah, cut off
Yeah,
there a
it
little bit
was
again, unfortunately. But go ahead, Stu.
it was rough to see Lamborghini end like the race that early the way that it did. And as you know, as Joni, you mentioned there, like, you know, we would have loved to see them fighting for that sort of top five pace. And you know, it really looked like, you know, from the week and a half prior to that, they kind of had the pace to be able to do that. They were putting some, obviously they put a quick time down in testing, you know, back in November, December. But they followed that up with some solid pace at the Roar. And then I thought that they were, even though it was very different conditions than we were going to be seeing in the race, throughout, you know, Rolex week, they were still putting, you know, respectable lap times down. And you really thought that this, yeah, could be the race where we see them kind of have that solid result and maybe get that first IMSA top five. But it just wasn't meant to be. A heartbreaking end for them. Really a heartbreaking end for Lamborghini, not just the SC63, but all of those cars across the board, because those GT cars, man, I thought, like, the way that they were going to be around there at the end, fighting for one of or both of those GTD class wins. And just, you know, it's really tough weekend for Lamborghini overall.
Yeah, and here's a note I want to make about Lamborghini. And I'll be a little careful with how I word this because this is a secondhand source. But I have on pretty good authority from somebody who is a part of a championship winning team in GTP and IMSA, that the Lamborghini program this year was marred with issues from the beginning of January. They only took delivery of that car. This was confirmed. They only took delivery of that car the week of the Roar. You know, we're talking days before, not months. And from what I had been told, the car was delivered to them in a state that was not up to par to be running in the 24-hour race. Some issues with the engine. I'll sort of leave it at that. I don't want to go too deep because, again, this is a secondhand source. But from what I'd heard, they were really struggling to get that car even track ready to get that thing on track for the 24. So to see them have the reliability issues that they had, oh man, I wish I could say it was predictable. Because obviously if you watched my video that I put up last week when we were discussing Rolex 24 predictions, I said they seem to have the reliability down. And lo and behold, I say things like this and then they retire in the first hour of the race. Can't really be too surprised about it with my track history. But
That's us.
I think Lamborghini with that new team and Riley this year, there's definitely a lot to come for them. I think Daytona was a bit of an outlier. I think we saw that car has more potential last year. Yes, it is a little bit inconsistent track to track on where it actually has that ultimate pace. And yes, they're only running in the Michelin Endurance Cup races this year. But here's the deal. I think Lamborghini's going to have to turn that program around, and Riley's going to have to turn that program around. If not at Sebring, definitely by Watkins Glen in the middle of the season. Because if we can, all three of us, be honest here right now, I think Lamborghini has not taken that program the direction they had expected when it was announced a couple of years ago. They're already not running in the World Endurance Championship anymore. They're down to a single car in IMSA after a potentially rumored second car was on the table. They're not running the full season in IMSA this year. A lot of things with that program are starting to scare me a little bit. And so I'm hoping, for the sake of leaving a manufacturer here, I would like Lamborghini to continue. I would love Riley to find ultimate pace out of that car and the reliability they certainly need to go with it. And I think, honestly, I think they're going to need that if they want that program to continue beyond this year. That's my 2 cents about it. Jonah, what about you?
Yeah, and hopefully my internet connection stays with me for a while. But
More
I
reliable than
want
Lamborghini.
true that, and I think just to note on Lamborghini, I was thinking while you guys were talking about this that this I feel like is going to be another learning year for them. Like I know that usually with new manufacturers it takes about a year and then they're back to kind of how things go, but I think we're going to have to give them the benefit of the doubt here because the fact is that they're heading into a kind of a new journey with Riley, with this new program, new team. Iron Lynx is no longer a part of that. So they're only doing IMSA as well, as you guys just mentioned. And so it's going to be difficult. Sebring, I'm hoping for a better result because this is a track that the SC63 has run on before. But we'll see. We'll see how it goes. But it's also scaring me, as you mentioned, Chris, because there was rumors a while ago that Lamborghini was thinking at least till 2027. I'm thinking that there's a possibility that this program could be done by the time of the end of this year. And I'm hoping that doesn't happen. I really hope, because I love Lamborghini as a brand. It's great to see them in prototype racing. It's great to see them in IMSA. But we'll see. We'll see how that goes. But yeah, in general, things are not looking good for Lamborghini right now, at least. And I'm hoping that things pick up.
Yeah, and as I said, I do expect things are going to turn around for them, but we'll have to see. Stu, what about you?
I think you can kind of it kind of reminds you, maybe at a bit more of an extreme level, to kind of where BMW was maybe at this point last year. BMW, their first year in IMSA was, I mean, apart from, I want to say, lucking into a win at Watkins Glen, I mean, they ran well, but I mean, ultimately they probably shouldn't have won that race. Like BMW had a very disappointing first season in IMSA, and they had a very disappointing start to the second year in IMSA. There was a lot of turnover that happened from year one to year two, but then towards the end of the year they started to figure it out, and I think there was obviously this is a huge change going, like Riley taking over this program, and taking it over kind of in the when it's on its last almost legs. It's kind of a last ditch Hail Mary effort to get this car on the grid and keep it on the grid. I think we can, as Jonah said, expect better results as the season goes on and as Riley gets a better grasp on the car. But I think, hopefully that this program is given a legitimate shot, and Riley's given a legitimate shot to improve this program over 2-3 seasons. It kind of reminds me a lot of BMW, and we know look at what BMW did last year. They turned it around over the course of the season. It was a slow effort. They ultimately had a really good run at Indy, and they've carried strong pace through into this year. So hopefully Lamborghini can be sort of 2025's BMW and turn it around. But one of the other things that I was thinking of with Lamborghini as well is the new GT3 car is set to come out next year, and got to wonder how Lamborghini's not a huge manufacturer. They don't have a huge they're not like some of the other manufacturers that have a lot of resources that are dedicated to these LMDH cars, and you wonder if resources are getting potentially stretched a little bit thin, with the SC63, also this GT3 car that's being developed, and how that could also impact decisions as the season goes on.
Yeah, I sort of echo that as well a little bit. To your point about them improving, sort of echoing or mirroring what we had seen with BMW. My main concern with that, and again, I'm not saying that they're not capable of doing this. I do think they're going to turn this program around, but they do have a larger mountain to climb, in that this is a car that's only going to be running 5 races this year. Worldwide, only going to be running 5 races. Essentially cut in half from what they were able to do last year, where they were running in the World Endurance Championship full season as well. What comes out of that? A lot less data, a lot less on-track time, obviously, a lot less time to sort of fix some of those issues that are marring the program in the car in its early stages. And ultimately, let's just face the hard facts right now. Yes, this is their second season with the car, but by the end of this second season, they're going to have less on-track time than most manufacturers had at the end of 1 year.
Yeah.
So it is definitely it's a tall mountain for Riley to climb. I certainly hope they find the other end of it. And as I've said before, and I'll say it again, I hope that we can see a continuation of this program. But I do think that's going to be a challenge for them or at least more challenging for them than it was for some of these other manufacturers.
Yeah.
I completely agree with that. Yeah. And it's just, we'll kind of see how it goes, and like, I kind of thought heading into 2024, Lamborghini was kind of on a similar position to Alpine. But I mean, we have to remember the fact that Lamborghini is a brand new manufacturer to prototype racing. They've never done this before, at least before 2024, where a brand like Alpine, they were rival.
So it
So
goes.
it's funny. I gotta be honest with you. I was on this thing with Jonah for a half hour before we started, and no issues whatsoever.
You know what?
Anyway.
It's me. I brought the technical issues.
Yeah,
just my
I'm
presence.
blaming on you. Anyway, Jonah, you can continue.
All right. Yeah. Sorry about that.
Oh, maybe not.
Just kidding.
Yeah. Try one more time. I think we got you again here.
Back again. But anyway, yeah, I keep getting cut off, so I guess I'll let you guys continue on with this, and we should probably move on anyway, because Lamborghini, we talked about them for a while, but I mean, it is just super disappointing to see their result at Daytona.
Yeah. So apart from that, Stu, I want to go back to what you were talking about earlier on, which was how competitive these cars were across the board. And I'll start with GTP. I really think there wasn't a standout favorite apart from, you can throw Lamborghini out of the equation. They were out of the race after an hour.
Yeah.
But apart from that, there wasn't a standout car that really had an advantage. And we can't always say that in the prototype division. We also certainly can't say it in the GT division. But to me, this was a race that was really on the cards for any of the manufacturers. This was a great debut race, as I predicted it would be, or great performance-wise at least. From Wayne Taylor Racing, it was great for Meyer Shank Racing. They came very close to winning the damn thing overall. I was very pleased to see both of those teams get up to grips with their new manufacturers very quickly. I think they were both certainly capable of winning that race. I would not have discounted either of them. And I think both of them, really, that's what they needed here. Meyer Shank Racing, they're coming off a 1-year hiatus. They're showing that they're absolutely leaving nothing on the table. They're taking that year off and saying that doesn't matter to us whatsoever. We'll be in the championship fight in 2025. Wayne Taylor Racing, yes, I've talked about it plenty of times. Very disappointing season for them last year. Apart from a couple of wins that they had, they weren't too successful in the overall championship fight. They were pretty close to the championship in 22 and 23, but ultimately fell short. I think this is a rebound that was really needed for them. And I'll get into my next point on this in a minute here, but I want to sort of get some of your thoughts on that as well before I continue.
I mean, I think I agree with part of what you said in that, Meyer Shank Racing, I think, showed that they haven't really skipped much of a beat. Having the 60, right there at the end was completely expected, and good for them to have, that sort of feather in their cap. But the Wayne Taylor Racing side of it, I think they got to be coming out of this like pretty disappointed, right? I mean, you had the unfortunate, mistake there by who was in the 40 at the time when they spun. Delatraz. But I mean, it's cold tires, that's just what happens. But I thought the 10, there was some unforced errors by the 10 that you don't necessarily see. Like, those penalties really came back to bite them. They could have certainly been there at the fight at the end. But I think to your point of, it has to be a positive for Wayne Taylor Racing coming out of it, knowing that, okay, if you had taken away some of those, maybe those silly unforced errors that we're not typically used to seeing from them, those
Right.
penalties, that they could be right in it running at the end. So there's 100% that positive there. But I think if you were to say to Wayne Taylor Racing, as Kobayashi was making all those moves in the middle of the race, that come the end of it, they wouldn't be, on the lead lap fighting for the win with either car, I think that would probably be disappointing for them. But yeah, I mean, Wayne Taylor Racing with the Cadillacs, they've shown they're going to be competitive, very competitive with those cars and in the hunt for a championship this year.
Yeah.
I completely agree. I think that Wayne Taylor Racing have strong pace. They showed that at Daytona. They should.
I don't know. I don't know what's going on here.
It's like as soon as Jonah wants to start talking, his internet's like, no. I have other plans for you.
Jonah, if you want to give it a refresh, I'll make sure you get back in here. But it's up to you. I do want to sort of talk about where you were heading here, Stu, which was the 40 car, and obviously that mid-race accident by Delatraz. That was a real turning point in the race, not just for them, but for many of the teams in the race. Okay, it was a turning point for 48 Paul Miller race.
Really good cars.
Really race potential winning cars, certainly. And it was like almost all of the cars that were involved there. So let's go down the list here. We had 48 Paul Miller Racing. Oh, wow. They became relevant at the end of the race. The 40, of course, the Wayne Taylor Racing Cadillac. Already talked about them enough here. The 70, not the Paul Miller Racer, the Pratt Miller Motorsports LMP2 car that was very surprising and strong to me in the LMP2 class. I mean, they were a genuine contender in their debut there. The number 2 United and GTD Pro favorite, potentially, the Pfaff Lamborghini, who, haven't really touched on them yet, but what a great debut for them in that car as well.
Yeah, another team, another Lamborghini team that got that car very late and showed up with, good pace, like very good pace at Daytona. And I think that was kind of, I alluded to it, that it was very difficult for all of those Lamborghinis through the race, but this really was a gut punch. This crash was a big gut punch, I think, for Lamborghini. That those GTD cars, they truly looked like, I mean, the SC63 was already out of it at this point, and those GTD cars and both of those GTD class cars, they all looked really strong. And to lose your one entry in pro with the lineup that they had and the pace that they had shown, just kind of minding their own business at that point in the race was a difficult one. But just a difficult accident kind of for everyone involved. There were some really hard hits in this. A really, really bad portion of the track to have a car spin around. It's on a restart. Like, it's blind, it's dark, there's not that much lighting there either. And you have the whole field piling through, made for a recipe for disaster. It was kind of the accident that we missed at the beginning of the race when we had, the 22 LMP2 that spun and was just sitting there in the middle of turn 1, like just absolutely blind. And he just got it backed up in time to avoid it looked like it was just a disaster waiting to happen. And this is kind of the wreck that we didn't get at that point. And it kind of caught. It's a what could have been, right? If that wreck doesn't happen, are we talking about the 40 being up there at the end and it being, an Acura, Porsche, Cadillac fight for the win? If we don't have this happen, are we talking about, Pfaff being in the running? Are we talking about double BMWs versus double Corvettes in that final few hours of that battle? That completely changes the narrative of the incident that we're going to talk about, I'm sure, in a little bit in that GTD Pro class. But this completely took the race and completely changed, what sort of the narrative was in the first half, or the narrative that was developing. So it was big, and it sucked to see. But I don't know, Jonah. Do you have any other thoughts on that wreck?
Fingers crossed
Oh,
we can
no,
actually hear him.
I caught Jonah at a bad time. He's not moving.
Am I moving now?
You look like you are.
Man, these internet issues. They really don't like me. Apologies for that. But yeah, that wreck, obviously the biggest of the entire race. We had so many cars involved in it. And I have to say, I feel so bad for Louis Delatraz. I mean, first off, he was the one that caused the incident because he spun. And then to end Cadillac's day like that is just, it's just horrible. And I do hope that Cadillac can come back stronger. It really did have some impact on a lot of things. I mean, the LMP2 battle, then the GTD Pro class. You know, he had Pfaff Motorsports and Paul Miller Racing caught up in that, and those were the two leaders of the event as well. So to have them both out of the race was super unfortunate. Of course, that did change the outcome, as you did mention just a moment ago, Stu. And I think it's just unfortunate for both anybody involved in this, really. I think particularly, though, Cadillac being out of the race with that car, considering it was likely the most competitive entry from the V Series Rs that were on the grid at the time, at least. It was just unfortunate. I really wish that if that didn't happen, Cadillac would have at least gotten a podium, because I think they had the pace, they had the potential with the 40 car at least. I mean, Kamui Kobayashi's stint, I think we should probably talk about that as well. Before all that wreck happened, Kobayashi, could we say that was probably the best stint of the entire race? Is that a thing to say?
It's up there for contender already, overtake of the year. I saw people just throwing him the trophy, throwing it at his head right now. I'm like, we're on the first race of the year, guys. Let's settle it down a little bit. But no, I mean, let's go on with that. Of course, it was a fantastic return to the Daytona 24 in the top class prototype division, where he really hasn't been for a few years now. He wasn't competing with Wayne Taylor Racing when they were with Acura. And we haven't seen him here in a prototype since the DPI days. So for his first race in that Cadillac GTP car, I mean, he's Kamui Kobayashi. What are you really going to say? But man, what a performance he was able to put down there. And it really just added to how disappointing it was that car was taken out of the running not too long after.
Yeah.
Sounds like we're on the
I think we've exhausted that. Yeah. Kamui Kobayashi, rock star, certified.
Yeah.
I completely agree with that. I mean, he's one of the best drivers in endurance racing right now. I mean, if you look over to the WEC, whenever Kamui gets into that Toyota, you know that car is going to have pace for a win if it's in contention, or if it's like just in the top 10 at least, it's going to get up there with Kamui behind the wheel. And I think that heading into this race, I was thinking, with Alex Lynn not coming into that Cadillac because of him not feeling well, I hope he gets better, by the way. I think that I was thinking, even though Alex is there, that gives Kamui a better opportunity to get into the car more.
And we got to see what Kamui could do when he got more seat time. It was put on a show. What was it? He picked up 9 spots in 14 minutes, I think, is what I saw on that safety car restart, or something ridiculous like that. It was, it's a shame that we don't get to see Kamui in more races here in IMSA, because getting to see some more of that Kamui magic would be a lot of fun.
Yeah. Well, and hopefully after that performance, we get exactly that. Some more races in the future. All right, let's move things on here. The night stint of the race. One of the talking points was with this race, specifically on the Department of Reliability, and not really in the way that we would think going into this. We were talking about hybrid issues the week of. There were some concerns as early as the Roar that, these hybrids may cause some issues in this race, which was a little surprising because they've been relatively drama-free for the first couple seasons that we've seen them. Couple changes to the hybrid system this year, and it seems like some of those newer parts may not be quite up to spec yet on the reliability front. But no, we really didn't have many issues with the hybrids in the race itself. What we did have an issue with were the suspensions. And it's difficult to know where you can attribute those suspension issues to. But there were, well, let's look at the track changes. The main track change that we saw this year was with that new, I'll call it the PC term. We'll call it the Le Mans chicane. The curbing that they have in there, that new FIA level curbing, FIA spec curbing that they put in there. You need no better visual of that than just looking at the Wayne Taylor Racing number 10 go launching through it in the final hours of the race. That's going to do a number on the suspensions for those cars, and especially with some of the cars in the GTP class, it took him out of the race entirely. I mean, we saw it take the number 5 car out of the race overnight. A few hours before that, it was really what put the 93 car for Meyer Shank Racing out of contention. I mean, especially in the case of Meyer Shank, this is a car that was probably going to be a contender come the end of the race. Look at where their teammate was. To me, that's one of the main talking points out of this entire race, was just how much of an issue the suspensions were.
Well, and just to add on to that, I mean, imagine what was going on here with Daytona. Imagine when we get to Sebring. Sebring is one of the most bumpiest tracks on the calendar. And I mean, what are we going to see? Is the suspension issues going to be another factor heading into that event? But we'll get into Sebring probably in another live stream. But in terms of Daytona, in terms of GTP, we lost 2 cars due to the suspension issues. Chris, you mentioned the 93 Acura and then also the number 5 Proton Porsche. And I think Acura definitely had the pace for the win. Just to continue on what you were saying there, the 93 car in particular, I think it's possible we could have seen Acura with the win, helping out the number 60 car if those suspension issues didn't plague the 93. But yeah, I guess we'll see how it goes when we head to Sebring. That's something I'm kind of curious about when we get to March. How will the suspensions be when it comes to the LMDH cars and the new LMH car coming as well from Aston Martin? Will that be a factor that IMSA takes a look at and maybe makes some adjustments, or maybe advises some teams to keep in mind of? I don't know. We'll see how it goes, but it's definitely made the subject of reliability, or at least the suspension part of it, more prominent on the side of the technical side of IMSA.
Well, and it's interesting that you bring up Sebring, because we've seen these cars for 2 years now at Sebring,
right,
and largely drama-free. At least in the reliability front. Everything that comes to my mind, I can't think of any, at least real issue like this that we've had. So I think the cars themselves aren't really the problem here, to be honest with you. I think the problem is maybe what we've seen on the track change front. And is that something that Daytona can improve for next year? Well, I would certainly hope so, if they discover that that's the root cause of the issue. Let's not forget that this wasn't just an issue for the GTP cars. This was largely an issue across the board, particularly for the prototypes. For some cars in LMP2 as well.
The 45 GTD, the Wayne Taylor Lamborghini, they busted their rear suspension, or broke.
True.
Did we ever hear exactly what broke? Was it? They broke, yeah. And probably because of some of those curbs.
Yeah, and it's easy to point the finger there. I'm assuming that that's the culprit, because let's be honest, this wasn't an issue in previous races. And if it's not an issue at Sebring, like you mentioned, Jonah, that would be the real place where the cars would probably get wrecked. You're talking about a high load corner for the suspension on these cars. Especially the prototypes with the speed they're taking through the chicane there. If you get a massive amount of stress on the suspension of that part of the corner, things are bound to go wrong. I don't know. I'm not an engineer, but that's the way I look at it as an outsider. And Daytona definitely seems like they're open to making changes. They had the president of Daytona Speedway on the Peacock pit box in mid-race, and he was right after Tom Christensen was very critical about the chicane curbing, funny enough. saying that they have some plans to fix it for the future, but that they want to take time and do it right. I don't know. I think that was a little bit of an oversight this year, and hopefully one that we don't have to talk about at the end of the Rolex next year.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen. It's not like this is the first time that curbing has been installed at a racetrack, like this, right? I wouldn't. It sucks that a change like this is played such a big role in the impact that it had on some cars in this race. Like we don't know what failed on the 31 either later in the race, right? Something failed, and it was something pretty catastrophic. We saw a lot of failures with cars that we haven't seen in this race in previous years. And as both Chris and Joni, you both alluded to, Sebring is generally regarded as being the hardest on a car, potentially of any track in the world, right? Like, if you can survive the 12 hours of Sebring, then you got to feel pretty good about bringing your car to Le Mans or, bringing it to Daytona for 24 hours. It's that 12 hours of Sebring that you talk about, is where reliability concerns kind of creep in.
Yeah.
And we've seen these cars for enough years now, and to see the number of failures, suspension related failures, is pretty high. So hopefully, Daytona takes a long look at this. We saw curbing replaced at Watkins Glen last year, and we didn't have the sort of failures. It's still a very similar like chicane set of corners, and we didn't end up seeing catastrophic failures like this. So hopefully we can see some lessons learned, and we come back next year with a different, not a different set of curbing, but without it being a major story.
Yeah.
Or a major concern.
Yeah. So, let's move on throughout the nighttime hours. Luckily, the actual nighttime itself wasn't too dramatic, so much so that I was able to catch the most amount of sleep I've gotten during a Daytona 24 in 10 years. Not entirely on purpose, but just being in the comfort of my own bed this year instead of on the turf in Daytona's grandstands.
It was cold. It was very cold.
I heard it was chilly. It was a nice 72 degrees in my room though. So let's go towards the morning hours of the race. The image of the race, really, of Paul Miller Racing versus Corvette. You've seen the pictures by now. You've seen the video clips of what happened. The whole backstory of it, of course, we talked about how the 48 car was put in that position because of that incident that happened, or the accident that happened the previous night that involved a bunch of strong running cars. Augusto Farfus is in the car at that time. You've got Tommy Milner and the Tommy Milner in the 4 Corvette. And I forget who was driving the number 1 Paul Miller Racing car at the time. But
Felipe, I think.
Okay, thank you. Battling for the race lead. And you got a wild Augusto Farfus in the 48, who's many laps down at this point in time, playing some defense. And the first surprise out of this, to me, honestly, I know this was going on for about 20 minutes. I was a bit surprised that IMSA penalized him for it. Because, number one, I don't believe he even got a warning. I don't believe it was shown on the official race control or race director notes that were out on live timing, unless they were informally warned by IMSA over the radio that, hey, cut it out, knock it off, we can't have this going on, this is a threat to ruin the race here. I didn't see any sort of warning go out before it was a slam dunk drive-through for the number 1 car, for the 48 car, which was a little bit surprising to me. I feel like IMSA is generally more just like, figure it on your own.
Yeah. Yeah, that is a little bit surprising. You're right. I guess there's other avenues that they could go through on the more sort of informal warning route. Is this even? I mean, obviously, I guess there's something in the rule book that they could penalize them for, but I guess they officially penalize them for blocking. Yeah. But maybe that might not be a warnable offense though either. Like they they may have just been looking for something to get them for. They may have had, this is all hypothetical, I guess, but I guess I haven't looked at the sporting regulations to see what the path is towards a penalty for that. If it's something that, if it's an egregious block, if they can just go ahead and do it, or if generally they would put out a warning, because we haven't really seen, we don't usually see, as you said, like stuff like this, penalties like this be handed out. Usually they're pretty, IMSA Race Control can be pretty hands off when it comes to this sort of thing. So yeah, that's actually a really good point. Maybe something to dig into a little bit more here between now and Sebring, like what kind of that process looks like for IMSA Race Control.
And let me just say the quiet part out loud here. The biggest problem out of all of that, and the cars getting into each other in the International Horseshoe, only came after IMSA decided to give the 48 car penalty. They gave the 48 a penalty, and then within a lap later, you've got cars banging into each other in the International Horseshoe. Corvette is damaged. 48 car is going to pit for their drive-through anyways. They don't care. They're how many laps down at this point? Hindsight's always 2020. I wonder if there was a better way to handle that. Give them a warning, say, hey, if you keep this up, we're about to penalize you. And I'm not saying that they were being egregiously, they were blocking even more egregiously once they got the penalty, but you certainly have to understand that from their perspective, okay, we already got the penalty. We might as well get our money's worth out of this. Let's help out the number one car as much as we possibly can before we have to serve this penalty. And he really backed the car up in the International Horseshoe. So,
oh yeah, he did.
That's my takeaway from it. It's a little bit interesting the way that IMSA approached it, because as you said, we've been critical in the past here that IMSA is sometimes a little bit too hands off. In the fact that there have been some championship deciding incidents that have just gone unpenalized, chalked up as race incidents. So I don't know exactly how this was handled behind the scenes, but from the surface, to me, the way it looked is, okay, you've got these guys, they're blocking for their teammates right now. Let's throw them a penalty, and then a lap after you throw them that drive-through penalty, all of it hits the fan. So I don't know. Jonah, what do you think about this?
Yeah, it's definitely a very dramatic moment, and I think we pointed it out earlier. It's been a while since we've seen something this chaotic. We had Tommy Milner flipping off another driver on the main straight, and so I think it's definitely interesting. And
whoops,
it's not just me. You turned it over to him this time.
No. Go ahead, Jonah.
I definitely want to keep in mind like the sporting regulations. I want to look into that and see what that's all about. But in general, it's difficult because I think James Hinchcliffe on the Peacock streaming commentary mentioned that Corvette, or at least Pratt Miller, didn't tell Tommy Milner that the car was coming in when the drive-through was sorted out. And I think that they should have told.
Yeah,
I didn't know that he didn't get that message relayed. These are the things you don't know at the track, right?
Yeah. That's what I heard.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I think that's what I heard over from James Hinchcliffe over on the commentary box, and I think it would have been nice if Tommy Milner knew that the car was coming in, and that way there wouldn't have been potentially that drama. I think that could have been avoided, even if the Corvette knew. So we'll see how that. We'll see kind of how that progresses throughout the season. Maybe some things change. I think this is all kind of a learning game. But ultimately, I think the thing that I want to point out from this, and this is something that's very important, is that BMW and Corvette here, they have this very intense rivalry going on. And it's great that that's going on. Maybe it was pushed a little too far on one side or the other. But ultimately, they both lost out. They both lost out to Ford. Ford came in and eventually won the race later on. So if that drama didn't happen, I think we probably would have seen a little bit of a different result. Of course, things did change later on, as we'll get into in a moment. But ultimately, neither of them got ahead from this.
Yeah, and it was ultimately a losing story for both of them, as you sort of touched on there. They did
Right.
both kind of get saved by the fact that at the end of the race we had a couple of full course yellows that really put them in contention again. And for Corvette, it was really a lucky break that made them be able to fix that damage that they had. I mean, that came out at the perfect time for the number 4 Corvette, because that was right after they had gotten a black and orange flag to come in and fix the car. And we had, who was stopped on track at that? It was one of the 3 times the leader in P2 had stopped on track. It was the 18, I believe. Was that the 18, or was that maybe when the 45 the suspension failed? I can't.
Oh, it might have been
45
that.
broke down.
I can't even.
It was somewhere around that time. Yeah, it was like one of those. It was a softer full course yellow in this race. It wasn't. Yeah.
I do remember the PCOM Racing entry did go off, but I don't remember if it was that entry at the time or if it was another one. Either or, there was a caution in it, and they got really lucky from that for sure.
Yep. I don't know.
But
go ahead.
I was just gonna say, even still, if Ford at the end of that race looked like they looked better than the Corvette and the BMW did, I think, in that closing stint. I mean, we did see, obviously we saw the contact between the 4 and the remaining BMW that was in contention. But the number 3 Corvette still didn't have really the race winning pace in that final stint. And you're right that Joni, you're right that the big story coming out of this is going to be, Corvette, BMW, the battle that they had, the fists that, were thrown on the track. Of course, there weren't any fists thrown off the track, thankfully. But the story really coming out of it should be, Ford breaking through for that big win and beating out the likes of BMW and Corvette, who have become so established in the GT ranks in recent years, and Ford really breaking through with that big victory for the Mustang.
Yeah, that's actually one of the points I wanted to talk about a little bit more here. One that was a result that was definitely coming, I think, but a bit of a surprise to me that it came here. Stu, you and I made a point last year, the second half of last year, especially talking about how much Ford and Corvette at the same time were slowly creeping up. They both had disappointing starts to the season last year, especially at Daytona. Neither one of them was really strong there last year. Middle of the season, though, we were talking about Corvette picked up a couple of wins. They got their first win at CTMP last year, if I'm not mistaken.
1-2.
With that new car. Yeah, 1-2 there. And then Ford, by the end of the year, they were trailing a little bit behind Corvette, but you could tell they were on the same trajectory. For them to hit Daytona as strong as they did this year, it's very reminiscent, sort of, when you look back at it, to the way that their Ford GT program had started. 2016, 24 Hours of Daytona, very disappointing one for them, one that they're going to want to forget. They'd much rather remember the 24 Hours of Le Mans that year. But reliability issues in the first race. Were not the fastest cars on track. Come back the next year, they win the race in GTLM. So I think what we saw here was very much an echo of what we saw. What is that? Oh, man, I'm going to really make myself upset saying that 2017 was 8 years ago now. But it's a very similar situation to what we had seen with them. And finally, for them to get that win on the ground with the Mustang GT3 car, I got to be honest, I think that this is going to be a strong season for them.
I completely agree. I mean, that was a breakthrough win for Ford. And
it's very peculiar how it happened.
We know he's going to come back in a second here.
Yeah. I'll just sip my
water.
There's
got to be some internet science behind this. Oh, we got Jonah back.
I'm still blaming you, Stu.
Sort of internet gods are up there and saying, right when he starts talking, that's when we drop his internet.
You're being silenced.
I guess so. But yeah, before I was rudely interrupted by my internet, the Fords this was definitely a breakthrough win, and this was definitely a strong performance. And I think we mentioned before here that very reminiscent to the GLM days. I mean, if you look to 2024 when the Mustang debuted, very disappointing Daytona, as you mentioned, Chris, and then Le Mans, they could have won that. They could have won that race if it wasn't for the troubles for the 77 Proton Ford. They brought 3 cars, eventually got their first podium ever with the Mustang GT3 with the Proton number.
Jonah's face right now is accurate of what he thinks of the network.
There we go. There we go.
There we go.
There we go. Okay.
You're finishing your thought on the first podium they got in the WEC?
Yes. I think that it's very reminiscent. That's my point, is that it is really reminiscent to what happened before. And I think we've seen it in the past with motorsport programs, GT programs, prototype programs, Porsche, a perfect example of that last year. And then for 2023, then 2024. The fact is that take a year, learn the program, learn how things go. The next year, come back strong, come back flying. And I think it's really just what's going to come for Ford. I think they're going to be title contenders in GTD Pro. It's going to be interesting to see if they can continue this pace in the Sebring event coming up. And I think another factor I want to mention as well, and I think this was quoted from Harry Tinknell. Don't get me wrong here. I could be wrong about this particular sentence, but he did mention that Ford has a really good customer program. They were really supporting Gradient Racing well with their GTD Ford, and he said he likes that a lot. And I think that that's amazing as well. So it's potentially possible that the GTD Ford could perform well as well with Gradient Racing running that entry. But I definitely think that this was a really big staple for Ford and Multimatic Motorsports, that they're not messing around. They're going into this and they're going strong into this. And I think that they have a really good shot at taking some more wins throughout the year. If they can win Daytona, they can pretty much win any other race in IMSA. But I guess time will tell.
Yeah, and here's one thing about Daytona that stands out. And Stu, I want to get your thoughts on this from being somebody who's at the track, seeing all these cars come barreling into turn one. I mentioned early on in the weekend to you, I said, those Fords look really quick in a straight line. Particularly was looking at the sector timing during qualifying, and I was like, they're picking up half a second in the second half of the lap, which is basically mostly straightaways, apart from the chicane. Did you notice anything while you were there? Did you see them getting by some of those slower GT cars any easier than some of the other cars in that class?
I don't know if I noticed that, but after you had sent me that message, I definitely noticed a couple of times in the race where, you could see cars get a really good drafting run on you're coming out of the bus stop or the Le Mans chicane, going through NASCAR 3 and 4 down the front straight. You can see cars pick up a really nice draft there, get a really good run on a car that they're chasing down. I didn't get to see all 24 hours of the TV coverage, being at the track, but I noticed a lot of times that the cars, they just couldn't get that draft, that same run that they could on other cars on the Fords. They couldn't quite make those gains. And then, I mean, the Ford was definitely, just because it was fast in sector 3, it was no slouch on the infield either. Yeah. Their sector times were competitive with all the other classes, or with all the other cars. So maybe Ford, figured something out. It probably wouldn't be all that surprising if we see a little bit of a BOP adjustment as well. Maybe bring back one of the things. Actually, I guess that this ties in to what the point that I'm trying to make.
Yeah, they don't want you making that point.
Now it's for Stu, the internet issues.
Stu, come back to us here. What you got going on? You cut out there. We're really all right. You're gonna have to take that whole point and replay it because we missed all of that.
You're hearing me now, though, right?
I got you. Yeah.
Okay. So the two-stage BOP, maybe IMSA's like just censoring the internet. He said BOP, cut the internet. But no, new two-stage BOP with the torque sensors. I think they did a great job overall. Like, we're coming out of this race, and if the main talking point coming out of this race, BOP wise, is that Ford was a little bit quicker in Sector 3, then I think that's pretty successful. And maybe there is going to be a BOP adjustment that's coming for Ford. That second stage power allotment, like above 150 miles an hour, or I can't remember where the stages are broken. Maybe there's going to be an adjustment coming for that. But all of that, and maybe that's why Ford had good pace on the straightaway. But BOP wise, considering all the things that we had coming into this race, all the big changes, I think that was a really good sign. And to wrap up the thought about Ford, obviously a great race for them, a well-deserved victory, finishing first and third in GTD Pro, like obviously a huge breakthrough result for them. And really sets them up well. We've seen cars, if you can do well at Daytona, it really bodes well for a lot of the tracks on the IMSA calendar. We've seen this across multiple classes in recent years. So Ford have jumped into the 2025 season and said, hey guys, we're here to win a championship this year. Try and stop us.
Yeah, very much similar to what Jonah was saying there. If you can win at Daytona, that steps you up really nicely. Jeez, you guys are getting silenced because of your internet, and I'm getting silenced because I can't finish a sentence tonight. We'll get there, folks. Ford is just showing that they're hitting the ground running this year. Okay, so I want to start getting into some of the winners in each class here. We'll start things off, of course, with GTP. What more can you say about Porsche? Like, seriously, what more can you say about the 963 at this point? The 963 has this like incredible ability to be quietly there throughout the race, like not really be the fastest car on pace overall, maybe not be your absolute favorite going in, but then when it matters most, when you get a late race restart, because they seem to know every single time that there's going to be a final hour yellow. There always seems to be in an IMSA endurance race. And they have the pace when it matters most. Because I was talking about Porsche to some of my friends throughout this race, and I said they didn't really have like that ultimate pace on Saturday. They were good, they were up there, but they weren't the top of the top. On Sunday, like, who was really there to fight them? The 24 BMW definitely put up a bit of a challenge. Dries Vanthoor unfortunately made a couple mistakes in that final stint that really took that car out of contention. I think they might have had the pace. We talked earlier about how the 60 car was pretty fast. Maybe they had a chance. But ultimately, when it mattered most, Porsche had pace. They had pace with both of those cars, and they had both of those cars in a position where one of them could sort of play as a bit of a blocker, not as egregious as we saw with Paul Miller Racing and Corvette, but at least hold that attacking Acura up a little bit to the point where, you mentioned earlier, Stu, if this went on another 5 laps, maybe we'd be talking about a different winner. But the 6 car was able to hold off the 60 just long enough to the point where we're not talking about that right now.
Yeah, I think that it's interesting because...
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Stu.
Nope. Go, Jonah. You're off and running.
Alrighty. Well, I was just going to say, I think the word I would describe this whole scenario with Porsche is consistency is key. They have been so consistent over their time in endurance racing with this 963. And I think this is proving exactly why Porsche is back in prototype racing. They are in it to win it. And 20 overall victories they have achieved at Daytona now. That is a milestone. Tandy is now a winner of all 4 big endurance races. That's Spa, Le Mans, Nürburgring, and now Daytona, alongside Lawrence Vanthoor and Felipe Nasr. And in 2022, I think it was, right when this program was kind of taking shape and the car was revealed in the summer, I kind of said to myself, and I think I may have mentioned it on a stream or a video or something like that, I said, give Porsche a year with this car, and then in the next year, they're going to be flying. And that's exactly what happened in 2024. And the reason why I said that is because of the past, the history that this manufacturer has, and the history that the Volkswagen Group in general has. Porsche in 2014. They had that 919. They came into the WEC and we're kind of like, okay, this car's competitive. It's got some problems. We're kind of ironing it out. 2015, they were so competitive across the entire season of the WEC. They ended up winning Le Mans. They had the fastest car across that event. And this is exactly a common repeat of Porsche. You also look to Audi as well in the years with the R10, the R8, more so the R10. And Chris, you were just mentioning a moment ago how at Daytona here, Porsche kind of was like, they weren't super competitive. They weren't showing like we were going to win this race. We're the clear favorites. But they're going to be there. And that kind of just reminded me of what Audi did with the R10 program. This is exactly what we saw at Le Mans, like with Peugeot. Peugeot was clearly the favorites at the start of Le Mans. They were really dominant. Audi, though, had a totally like different program, different strategy, different like car, and they could catch up and outlast the Peugeots on pace, on reliability, on consistency. And this is reminding me to exactly what Porsche Penske Motorsport are able to do. In 2024, Porsche 963s, those cars had no major mechanical issues across the entire Daytona event. All four of them were squeaky clean. Here, of course, we had the number 5 Proton competition Porsche, which had that suspension issue, but that may have also been down to the curbs, like we mentioned before. So take that particular scenario out. All the 963s had basically zero reliability issues, zero problems, despite that suspension issue. Like I mentioned, could have been because of the curbs. So in general, Porsche has been so consistent. They've been so just perfect with everything. And this is something that we have seen in the past. And this is just absolutely incredible. If Porsche can continue what they did in 2024, they're going to be winning another championship in IMSA and potentially in the WEC as well. I think we're just in for a very, very exciting season. The question to me is when it comes to Porsche, when it comes to IMSA for the remainder of the seasons after the Rolex 24 is, can anyone catch them? Can anyone fight them? Can anyone battle them and take this crown? Because Porsche, to me, are the clear favorites. At least Porsche Penske Motorsport are.
Well, and can anyone fight them at a certain race? Certainly, yes. But can anybody be as consistent as them? I think that's really the big question here. Stu, you had a thought you wanted to continue earlier.
Yeah, I mean, Jonah kind of touched on it there. Is the thing that kind of got me with Porsche in this race is, really like the first half of this race, they kind of flew under the radar. I mean, nobody was really talking about Porsche. We were all being distracted by the new shiny things like BMW running up front, Kamui passing, a bazillion people in half a lap. We were kind of all distracted by that. And then meanwhile, Porsche's just, going out there running their race. And, it just showed they just ran a quiet race and just did it well. That's literally what it came down to. They knew what they had to do. They had to have both cars in good position at the end of the race, and that's what they did, and that's the reason why they won the race. If they only have one of those cars up there at the end of the race, they probably don't win. You probably see Blomqvist, or at least it's a heck of a lot closer than, the 1.3 second gap it was at the end.
Which is still pretty close.
Yeah. I'm saying that like that's not close after 24 hours. But one of the things that stood out to me too is the first 2 years of the GTPs, the LMDH cars racing in this race, the car that's dominated and come on and really been strong through the night has never been the car that's won the race. Like we saw Cadillac the first year. They really came on strong with the 0-1 through the night. When the sun went down, they got strong. We saw Cadillac again be strong last year, but just come up short at the end of it again. And the car that's kind of emerged in the morning when the sun comes up has been the car that, has generally been able to grab the race and go on and win it. And Porsche kind of bucked that trend a little bit. They came on strong in the nighttime. They really showed their pace. And I was thinking during the night, like, okay, Porsche's strong now. Who's going to emerge as sort of that real threat when the sun comes back up? Because that's when the pace matters. And I was thinking BMW, like BMW was fading during the night. Maybe they could come back. But no, Porsche, they did a really good job keeping up with adjustments. Of course, the initial setup of that car, to have it so strong in all of those conditions, a really impressive win from Porsche. The one thing that I do agree that Porsche on the season long front has to be the championship favorites. I think they were the championship favorites coming into this race, and continue to be that coming out of it. I think this is going to be a much different championship than we saw the past couple of years. First year we saw, Cadillac, all the manufacturers were kind of in it towards the end, or in that final race. It was kind of a 3-car hunt. I think this year, coming out of the first race, it legitimately looks like all 4 of the full season manufacturers are going to be on for a race win at some point this year, or multiple race wins. Like, we could easily be talking about all 4 of those manufacturers picking up multiple wins over the course of the season. And like you said, it's going to be about consistency 100%, but it's also going to be about those big wins in those big moments. Ask Wayne Taylor Racing what consistency does for you, as opposed to winning races. So this is going to be a lot of fun to watch as the season runs on. All 4 cars had legitimate, race winning pace. All 4 manufacturers at one point or another, and man, Sebring can't come soon enough to see sort of round 2 of what this battle is going to bring us.
Yeah, and the other thing as well is all 4 of those full season manufacturers had cars finish in the top 5. So
yes,
if you exclude the privateer Porsches, I guess JDC is going to be the only one running full time this year. You have, and JDC, for what it's worth, finished 6th. So you really have quite a spread there across the top 5 and 6 cars for the championship. It's not like one team was really out of this one. I mean, Lamborghini was, but they weren't in the full season championship question anyways. Each team right now has a car really in the top 5, in contention. Well, of course they're in contention. We're only one race in, but at least not a disastrous result where we're going to look back at the end of the season and say Daytona is really what killed it for them.
Yeah, I think another factor as well, and I think this is what we were alluding to, but we also have these teams that are partnering back up with these manufacturers, and they're bringing their A game for this race. I mean, for the season, sorry. You have Meyershank Racing back with Acura. This is a team that has had success with Acura 2023, 2022.
Cadillac.
Yeah, Cadillac, Wayne Taylor Racing. I mean, like, what a partnership. The last time Cadillac won at Daytona, it was with Wayne Taylor Racing. They also have Whelen with the Action Express Racing, 2 teams that have the pace, and that's just going to bring Cadillac up. Then you also have BMW. I mean, this is a manufacturer that we've touched on. BMW was a very, very competitive manufacturer at Daytona. You also have Team RLL also bringing in different drivers. That's another factor as well. You have drivers like Dries Vanthoor now doing IMSA full season, a very competitive driver as we've seen in the WEC. And I think there's a few others as well, like Sheldon van der Linde. So I think all 4 of those main manufacturers have a chance to get in the fight for the win at Petit Le Mans. And I think that we're in for probably one of the coolest ends to the season and the coolest title fights in GTP with how things are setting up right now.
Yeah, and I did leave one team out of that, notably the one that I picked for the race, and of course cursed them again. It was a 31. They finished P9 in that race. I'm hoping their luck turns around for the sake of that team. I remember when they were like the frustratingly dominant team in IMSA, but now they just need to find any way back up to the top after the year they had last year and the start to this season. But, obviously that's a difficult race for them at Daytona. And they were really a strong team as well. We could have been set up for a repeat of 2024. And I wanted to make this point earlier when we were talking about Porsche, but it was very similar to how they came alive in the race last year as well. They really weren't like the standout favorite going into the race. They just came alive when it mattered most and were the quickest car when it mattered most. But yeah, tying it back in with a 31 car. Hopefully this isn't a representation of what's to come for them this year. I think it certainly has to be bluer skies down the road.
What a hard hit that was too. Like
Yeah.
that was a scary accident. I remember when the broadcast panned to the car just sitting there, and you're like, how on earth did it get? How did it? What happened? And then they showed that replay of it just breaking, and the straight ride up the hill into the wall was, a real testament to the safety of these cars. The 31 has certainly put the safety of that Cadillac through its paces between the Sebring wreck last year and now this one. And but man, some cattle or that 31 cannot buy a break right now. It's
really can't.
That's they paid the price, for that first season championship with a year 2 hangover, and it's not starting off strong on year 3.
Yeah.
No, it's
Well,
really not.
hopefully they can finish their job at Sebring this year, and with any luck, maybe that's where their season and their bad luck turns around.
I think the key is we just can't pick them for that race,
No,
right?
yeah.
Can we agree to that right now?
I did it as a little bit of
Yeah.
a joke, but Jonah, we're going to throw you in on this as well. No picking the 31 until they win a race, because we're obviously not helping them out here. All right, I do want to move things on to LMP2 because we've been talking about Daytona for a long time here, and there's another thing I want to discuss after this, and then we're going to get to your questions, of which there have seemingly been quite a few. LMP2, well, if this podcast was recorded about 12 hours ago, we would have been talking about the number 8 Tower Motorsports car finally picking up a Daytona 24 win after being a very strong team in LMP2 for a handful of years now. We're not going to be doing that, unfortunately. They were penalized. This was announced this afternoon because of excessive block wear on the skid block in the car. Now, this penalty has been basically a slam dunk penalty in IMSA and the WEC for about a decade now. The first real case I remember of it, 2016, 6 Hours of Silverstone, the winning number 7 Audi was disqualified after the race because of a skid block infringement. I think it was like less than a millimeter then. Porsche at Watkins Glen 2023, overall winning car there, disqualified for a skid block infringement. BMW wins that race. Now we're seeing it here at the Rolex 24 at Daytona. Now, it's important to know, and Sebastian Bourdais was very quick to note, that this is not a case of the team trying to skirt around the rules here. They're not doing this. This was not an unfair advantage that the team deliberately made. In fact, they noted that the excessive block wear was due to a rear third damper failure piece of the suspension. We were talking earlier about suspension failures throughout this race. Now, luckily for them, they didn't have a full suspension failure, but does it really matter when you're disqualified after the race? Is this something that we can chalk up to some of the suspension issues that were plaguing other cars as well? I'm not too sure. Again, we haven't really heard anything too formal yet, and I guess it'll be hard to put the pin on the pin on the pinata or whatever for this one exactly.
That's a new one.
That's not a real saying, by the way. But I don't know. That was the first thing that came to my head is, oh man, is this like a car that won the race, really didn't do anything to their own fault, but have been stripped away from this one because of something that may have been completely out of their control? I don't know. That's where my mind went.
Yeah, I think, I think the, overwear on the skid plate, and I think the curbs, the bus stop chicane, I don't know. If there was a failure, again, in a car that we don't generally see very many catastrophic failures in, but I feel like there's probably a connection there. I know having, I spoke to Gar Robinson at one point over the weekend, and he commented that, the curbs in that car are absolutely lethal. Like you had to avoid the bus stop curbs because like they will damage the car. And like, could that have been just enough to, get a little bit more wear on those skid plates and cause it to be under spec, there's probably a strong point or a strong possibility that that's the case. But overall for Tower Motorsports, they've had a rough couple of seasons. And in particular, their bronze rated driver, John Ferrano, he had that wreck at Laguna Seca. Was it last year or 2 years ago? That caused him to miss some time. He had to miss some races. I think he actually had to miss the 24 Hours of Le Mans that year, and he had won the Bronze Cup Championship. Ended up missing Le Mans. It's been a rough little run for them, and this was kind of a feel good story. Coming out of the race, a class that was very competitive over the course of the race. You want to talk about a class that you couldn't predict who was going to win. There were a lot of teams and a wild finish at the end. With cars in this class not knowing if they were going to be able to make it on fuel, and penalties and some mechanical issues for one of the cars. This was a class that kind of flew under the radar, I think, with everything that was going on in GTD Pro and kind of in GTP. And this was a really good feel good story, I thought, for Tower, and to have that taken away is a big blow for them. But I think it's a team and clearly a lineup with Bourdais, who's going to be in that car for all but one of the races this year. That certainly looks like they've established themselves as contenders in this class, and I'd be keeping an eye on them as the season goes on. Tower, they know how to win this championship. They did it, not that long ago, or at least I don't know if they won the full season championship that year, but they at least won the Bronze Cup. This could just be another case of the Curbs taking another victim.
Yeah, and in a race that nobody in LMP2 seemingly wanted to win, one of the teams did step up to the plate. It was the 22 United Autosports team. Rasmus Lind, James Allen, Paul di Resta, and Daniel Goldberg announced as the winners this afternoon, at least at the time of recording. You can't really fault them for it. They're not going to be able to do the at-track celebration they would have been granted had they crossed the line first on Sunday, but nonetheless, I think they're still getting the Rolex watches. So
they are.
That's really all that matters at the end of the day.
Oh, you got to feel for the Tower drivers, right? Having to give that watch back. Oh, man.
Yeah.
It's so unfortunate. It's like the worst thing ever. In terms of losing Daytona with a penalty. I mean, the win as well. I mean, considering where Tower was as well. I mean, going back to that wreck with the 40 car, I remember, I think the Tower number 8 car was involved in that incident. And considering that it was there and then it went on to win was really a feel-good story. I mean, you guys explained just a moment ago that Tower have been in a really difficult situation over the last couple of years. Stu, you mentioned that John Ferrano had that accident in Laguna Seca and couldn't race for a while. And it's just, it's really unfortunate to see them not get that win, but I mean, rules are rules. It's just how it goes, I guess. Yeah, it's something to definitely look into in terms of Towers, the technical thing that IMSA found. But yeah, in general, it's great to see United Autosports on top. I think it's awesome to see the number 22 get the win. They were in contention for it, of course. We talked about how competitive LMP2 was, how unpredictable it was as well. I had a really hard time making a prediction for LMP2, as I'm sure you both did as well.
Oh yeah.
Because it was so competitive. I think in testing as well, we had the cars, all 12 of the entries under 0.7 of a second or something like that in one of the testing sessions, and that was just it proved that we were going to get a pretty epic LMP2 race at the Rolex 24 at Daytona. So yeah, just really unfortunate situation for Tower Motorsports. I hope that they can come back stronger at the next event at Sebring. Also, an event that they've won before. We remember back to 2023, they were on the overall podium, technically, I think, with the number 8 car in third after the chaos that ensued at that event. Of course, they weren't on the I think the number 6 Porsche, even though it DNF'd, got on in third for the GTP podium. But Tower Motorsports got the win of Sebring. They got the overall podium. What an achievement for them. Maybe they can take the results that they had at Sebring in 2023 and remember that, and maybe they'll have a redemption story at a track that they've won before.
And that was after, I think in that race as well, that 8 had wrecked early in that race and like tore up the front and the rear of that car. They nursed it back and were able to, replace the bodywork and got it back out there. Yeah, that race is bringing big flashbacks now. That was that would be Sebring. Turn it around, guys. Turn it around.
Yep.
Yeah. And with GTD Pro, we already touched on I think everything we needed to touch on there already with the Corvette Paul Miller Racing debauchery and the win for Ford there. Worth noting as well, though, because I forgot to bring this up. It was a good weekend for Multimatic with a win for the chassis in GTP and a win as a team in GTD Pro. But I think, we've already talked enough about that class. Let's talk about GTD. Another sort of, I don't want to say underdog story. It's another team that's been on the rise over the past season since their debut in class. But AWA, Stu, your Canadian homeboys, who I don't think they're still in Florida, unlike you, but finally getting a win with their Corvette Z06 GT3R. Sort of a redemption for Corvette losing that win in GTD Pro when they were very strong contenders there. A great win for them and their first win in IMSA competition in the WeatherTech Championship GTD class as well.
I mean, that car was beat up at the end of this race. They went like probably half that race, if not more, without both of the side mirrors on that Corvette. It was I remember hearing that in the middle of the race and then seeing it at the end still without mirrors. I was like, wow, that's an impressive feat. Get that little bit of extra aero on the high banks. But no, I mean, I think GTD it was an incredible battle. The final 38-minute stint or whatever it was of this race. You had the 13. The 27 was going at it with them on that restart. They were doing it kind of in traffic. I think the prototypes had caught them at this point. And, after making a little bit of contact, a little bit of beating and banging that was not the same level of beating and banging that the Corvette and the BMW were doing, but some elbows out racing. They ended up getting a little bit separated from some traffic, but a great final stint there from Matt Bell to bring that one home. And I mean, you've probably seen the photos.
Yeah, that's what I was going to talk about.
Of Matt Bell, in front of the car at the end of it. Like that really goes to show just how much this all means to the drivers, to the teams. Everybody that's sort of associated in the sport. Like this is a really, really big deal. And now they can say that, they have a chance now to go for the Rolex and Le Mans double, right? I mean, they're going to be going up against it in LMGT3, but it's not very often that you get an opportunity to do that in the same season with them winning the Bob Akin award from last season. So, for a small team like AWA, I think this is their second win. Oh no, they did. I think they won Indy in LMP3 as well. But this is their second win now in the Rolex 24. They won it a couple years ago in LMP3, and now to back that up with a GTD win, it's we talked about Tower would have been a feel good story in LMP2. This is a feel good story in GTD for sure. It's a team that has risen through the sports car, and specifically the IMSA ranks over the years, and to get to this point now where they've arrived, they've won the GTD class in a Corvette is a pretty cool story for them. And that's completely glancing over some of the other incredible runs that we saw in this race. I think there were at least four cars that led over 100 laps in the GTD class. And,
Yeah.
you know, it's not just AWA. You're talking about like Windward, Wright. I think Heart of Racing was the other one, the cars that essentially finished 1, 2, 3, 4. GTD was a really good battle and a really good finish in that class.
Yeah, Stu, I think you said it well there. AWA, another feel-good story when it comes to IMSA, the Rolex 24 at Daytona, especially considering this was their first win in GTD with the Corvette entry. To get it at the Rolex 24, it's just a beautiful start to the season for AWA. I mean, we just touched on the fact that they're going to Le Mans with that Aiken Award achieved last year, and to go to Le Mans and say, hey, we're the winners of the Rolex 24 at Daytona. We're going to try and go win Le Mans now. If they can do both in the same season, what a fantastic year it would be for that Canadian team. So yeah, I think it's amazing that they're on top. They have that really cool livery as well, the black, all black Corvette. It was a car I was hoping to see get a good result. And I think that now that they got that good result, for me, it's like, okay, you've got Daytona. Let's see what you can do at Le Mans.
Yep. Yeah, and obviously that'll be one of the storylines that we're looking forward to for about 5 months from now.
Yep.
All right. So I am going to transition things over here. Enough talking about the Rolex 24 for now, unless anybody had any questions on it. I'm scrolling down the long list of chat messages we've had during this episode to see if there were some questions. Not really a question here. But
I noticed.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna make it. I was gonna joke and say that nobody was asking either Jonah or myself for tech advice.
Well, you know, what are you gonna do? All right, listen, we're
Let's
jerry rigging this episode because you know you're on a hotel mobile Wi-Fi hotspot, and Jonah was just unpredictable from the start, being in here for the first time. So as long as I'm, if I start conking out, then this podcast is really just over. So
I don't want to curse anything, but my internet seems to have. It's okay.
Yeah, don't say that. Don't say that. Listen,
I know.
I didn't want to. I thought it. Didn't want to say it.
It's gonna happen now.
So here's what I want to talk about. I want to talk a little bit more about the curbs because somebody in the chat brought it up, saying I like the change of the curbs. Every car had the option to stay off them to save their suspension. 24-hour races are supposed to be difficult. Every car is not meant to make it to the finish. Yeah, I think this brings up a very interesting sort of side argument, which is we've talked before about our cars becoming too reliable in endurance races to the point where that whole aspect of to finish first you have to finish largely hasn't been as big a factor anymore. And it's been really the last 10, 15 years where that's really started becoming the case. Speaking on the curbs directly here, to be honest with you, I personally don't have a huge opinion one way or the other, but I'm also not a driver in the race. You're absolutely right that it becomes more challenging for the driver. Listen, there's more penalty if you go off the corner in this. If you go off in this corner now, than there was previously when there was just grass. Maybe you would pick up a warning from IMSA for cutting the grass a little bit too egregiously, but at the end of the day, you weren't really taking any massive hit from that. With these new curbs, the question does arise, yes, is this something that the drivers just need to adapt to? Or is this something that all of the drivers are going to agree about and say, listen, it's unrealistic for us to maintain perfect driving lines through this high-speed corner for an entire 24-hour race, and if we get caught out even once, it has the potential to completely destroy our chances. There's sort of a double-sided argument to be had there. I don't know. What do you two think?
Well, Stu, do you want to go first?
I guess I kind of have a thought. I just view, I kind of see the changes to the curbing in the bus stop here is you're kind of trading in certain incidents or certain incidents that would take cars out of the race for others. And what I mean by that is in previous seasons, with changing up the curbs, that came with completely paving over the bus stop. So let's just refer to this as the whole reconfiguration of of the bus stop.
Yep.
You know, in recent years, if you spun out going through the bus stop, especially after that first little turn in, you're probably ending up in the tires like pretty hard. We saw it. We've seen an incident almost every year whether it was LMP2s or GT cars. They're going through, they get side by side. One of them gets bumped around, spun around, and they back it into the tires on the outside of the bus stop curb hard, or nose it in there pretty hard, because it's all grass there. And you can't stop the car in the grass. You can't control the car. You're along for the ride at that point. Now, when they paved over, they completely paved the bus stop, and coming with that, they had to replace the curbing that was pretty. I think the drivers liked it. It wasn't terribly hard on the cars. They replaced that with this new curbing, and we kind of traded in maybe some of those incidents that we would have saw before, where cars would have been kind of taken out, with maybe some more reliability induced retirements. Right. Now, is that a completely accurate thing to say? Like, it's only been one race. Maybe we're going to come back next year and there's going to be 5 big incidents, cars going, backing it into the tires there. But I guess the point of it is, like, if we had left the profiling the same as last year, maybe there would have been fewer mechanical issues that we saw take place, but there could have been more other incidents that we saw through there as well. At the end of the day, like, we could sit here and talk about it all day, right? But there's nothing that we can do about it, and we've seen multiple changes now at multiple different tracks over the year, like between last year and this year, the Watkins Glen and Daytona. Being, these changes being done for the benefit of other racing series. And I think we just have to, take it as it is. It sucks. But at the end of the day, like, you look at the bus stop, it was still, or Le Mans chicane, it was still the Le Mans chicane. It was still the bus stop. Like, it was still, it still had that, maybe it didn't have quite the character that it used to, but it's still iconically that corner. And, I don't really know what else I have to say other than that, is that, like, it is what it is. It is what it is.
I think you said it perfectly, Stu. Yeah, I think you said it perfectly. I mean, I'll just be brief here, because I think I echo your words here, because there's nothing really we can do. I mean, yeah, it does kind of suck, as you mentioned, but, like, what are we going to do about it? We aren't a part of the stewarding or the organization committee of IMSA or Daytona or whoever is here. But I think in general, to put on the point that racing getting more, I guess, less reliability stuff happening? Is there less problems happening? I think, yes, I think that is the case. And I think that it's the cars that are getting so sophisticatedly better over the time. Times are progressing. That's life. Things evolve, and I think that's inevitable, and that's okay. So it's just kind of, for me, I don't really have a big opinion on the curbing, as you mentioned, Chris, as well. It's, for me, I'm just kind of waiting to see how things play out and see how these will affect the racing that we see. Watkins Glen, Stu, you mentioned earlier, had changes. We've seen this before. I was thinking back, I think an F1 circuit had a major change like this a long time ago, where there was they paved over the entire section, and there was a lot of controversy that came up of it. I can't remember exactly what circuit, but the fact is that this has happened before. It will probably continue to happen, and that's okay. That's life. Things happen, and we just move on and just kind of take what we see and talk about it like we're doing right now.
It certainly didn't affect the intensity of this race, right? These bus stop changes didn't affect the intensity.
Right. And Jonah, you sort of touched on there. I mean, the whole curbing question is something that's been brought up in F1 plenty of times now. This is not the first circuit where they've been installed, and it's also not the first time they've caused issues. So I'm going to take it the way it is right now. We'll see how the drivers want to respond to it. See what the manufacturers and teams want to respond to it, because ultimately their opinion matters a little bit more than ours. So we'll see what we get next year. Could you give your opinion on the BMW hypercar program? I'm thinking of how much they've improved. Dries Vanthoor putting it on pole and why they weren't able to convert that to a win. Certainly, yeah. So BMW, we all touched on this a little bit earlier, so I'll keep it a little bit brief. But to me, okay, so I want to say this program is finally matured, and this program is finally at its true potential. But I don't want to jump the gun too much, because we saw a strong race out of them at Daytona. Okay, they ultimately had the pace to win that race. They put it on pole, like you mentioned. We've seen performances like this from them before. Okay, and what really matters for BMW this year is consistency. And I think they've been one of the manufacturers or one of the teams that has just struggled a little bit track to track to maintain consistency. You know, they either have a really good weekend or a weekend where they're like not even in the picture. And to me,
more of
this
the
year,
latter.
yeah, and to me, for them this year, this needs to be a season where they just get some of that consistency. More consistent podiums, even if you're not winning the race. Second place finishes, third place, top 5 for both cars. I think that is more important for BMW and Team RLL this year than overall race wins. They've proven already that they can win races, they can get 1-2s. Now it's going to be up to how consistently can you perform at that level. And for me, that's going to be one of the biggest questions going into Sebring is, can they back up that performance that they've shown at Daytona at a much different track?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that it's all about consistency for BMW. Chris, as you mentioned, it could completely change for them. We've seen it in the past how it has. At Daytona last year, we saw that they were somewhat competitive, but they had reliability issues. And then Sebring as well, they were somewhat competitive, but then there was issues, and it was just last year was a nightmare for them in IMSA at least. But then when we got to Indianapolis, things kind of changed, and here we are today. It is all about consistency for BMW. And I think that hopefully they can find that. And I'm kind of not just looking at IMSA, but I'm looking at the World Endurance Championship as well, because BMW headed into their first season in the WEC last year with that M Hybrid V8. And once again, consistency was a problem for them. We look towards the end of the season in the WEC, and BMW was very competitive. You look at COTA, the Lone Star Le Mans, the BMW cars in that race. I would say the M Hybrid V8s from Team WRT were probably the third fastest cars out on track. Ferrari first, Toyota second. When it came to the race, at least that's my opinion. Fuji, I think that they had the third fastest car again. And they were challenging for the win in that race. I mean, Porsche, they had very competitive pace, and then you go to Bahrain, and then once again, they weren't as super competitive as they were before. So it's really about consistency for BMW. And I think that one of the big changes they made for 2024, at least on the IMSA side of things, for 2025 on the IMSA side of things, is the drivers. You look to what they had last year. The only driver that has stayed on for 2025 in that M Hybrid V8 is Philippine, who is in the number 24 car. The 25 has an entirely new lineup. I believe it's Sheldon van der Linde and Marco Wittmann in the full season ride, and then Dries Vanthoor coming in for the 24. All three of those drivers and the ones they brought on for Daytona and for the endurance rounds have already proven that they are quite competitive. And remember, viewers, those drivers are also from the WEC, so they have experience from that sort of thing and the endurance rounds that they competed in beforehand. So I think that's not to say that all the drivers that they had before were bad. I think they were very talented, as we've seen in many IMSA seasons before. You look at Conor De Filippi, for example, in that number 1 Paul Miller BMW at IMSA. He was flying. He had a lot of pace. And I think that there's a lot of drivers like that are part of the GTP program or hypercar program that are still very quick and noticeable. But yeah, in general, I think that it's going back to the original subject. I keep repeating it, but I think that, Chris, you're totally right. Consistency is key for BMW. If they can nail that with reliability and competitive, they can be competitive and fighting for wins across both championships of IMSA and the WEC hypercar class.
Bold prediction.
That is. But you can see a path to it, though. You can see a path to it.
Yeah.
My quick opinion on the BMW program is 2 thumbs up. The only thing that I'll add to everything that you guys have already discussed is, it's very clear that consistency needs to be a key with BMW. One of the things that I to add that little extra bit onto that, it needs to be consistency among the finishes of an entry. I think that we could see BMW challenging for a manufacturer's championship before we see them challenging for a team's championship with like the 24 or the 25. With the I could see, like we saw issues with I don't remember which BMW it was in qualifying. Was it 20? Who said on pole? 25. 25 got pole. Okay. So we saw issues. Okay, so we saw issues with the 25 in qualifying, and then we saw issues with one of the BMWs in the race. Like, they have the pace, the raw pace is there, but the finishes, if they can make it to the end without issue, is going to be the key. So I think we could see a lot of strong runs out of BMW as a whole this year. If you're only having one car every race that's having a consistent, like one car that's having a good finish, it's not gonna be enough to cut it. So I think that's why I think we could see BMW competing for a manufacturer's championship maybe before they're ready for a team's championship, until you can build up that consistency, like we saw, as you guys were mentioning, and as we saw, displayed perfectly last year by Porsche with their consistency amongst both of their cars. There's still another step to be had there, but the BMW, this is a very good first, a very good opening race in 2025 for them, and also the first race that they've had their Evo Joker upgrades as well.
Yeah,
which I don't know if we know. Did we ever get confirmation on what those were? I never saw anything that was, that kind of went into detail. I know that there was a question mark about whether they were going to need an Evo Joker, but what they ended up changing on the car was kind of not mentioned in anything. So I wonder what they changed.
Yeah, I'd have to look into it. I wasn't too sure.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll move it on to the next one here. We had someone saying, "I'm surprised how uncompetitive the Ferraris were." I don't think the Ferraris were overly uncompetitive, and if they were, then it's certainly a telling of how competitive GT actually was this year, because they were not uncompetitive to the level of some of the other cars in past IMSA endurance races, and notably 24 Hours of Daytona. In fact, this was the first year I think we're walking out of this 24 in the last couple of years where there isn't a standout GT car that was really struggling excessively. Dragon Speed had some time. They led some time during the race. They made a couple of mistakes. Ultimately, still finished in the top 6. They were on the lead lap. You look down in GTD class as well. AF Course finishing in 7th in that class, which was ultra competitive, only within 10 seconds of the race winner in that class. Sure, they may not have been the ultimate favorite on pace, but I would say, all things considered, it wasn't a disappointing race from them, I would say. Maybe a little bit when you compare it to last year where they won in GTD Pro, but we're talking about a different program this year. Dragon Speed, despite having Risi Risi backing with that program, it is a completely different team with a lot less experience than Risi with that car. So there are other factors at play there.
Yeah, I think, Ferrari, they were complaining a little bit earlier in the week about, some BOP stuff, but you're always going to hear, some moaning and groaning in the lead up to it. But yeah, I don't think there's anything to really be concerned about with Ferrari's pace. As you said, Chris, there's not really, of the 9 manufacturers in the GTD class. I mean, you could have realistically had any of them any of them be on the podium, any of them be on the top step of the podium. So, yeah, Ferrari. I mean, we've seen Ferrari. Ferrari came on strong last year. We're going to see Ferraris winning races this year. It's just the way it is.
Yeah, and the only thing I wanted to add on to the Ferrari subject was that Dragon Speed, that's the only entry in GTD Pro, if I'm not mistaken, for Ferrari at Daytona. Yep. And that entry is basically new to IMSA. This is the first time that car kind of competed at Daytona. I think, Stu, in our video that we did, we were covering on new entries to Daytona, and that was one of the entries that I kind of researched a little bit. And I was thinking, yeah, this truly is Dragon Speed's first time to Daytona with that Ferrari. Their only second race in GTD Pro, as well, as they appeared at Petit Le Mans last year in the Pro category. But that was kind of a different story. So in general, they were kind of on it was a learning curve for them at Daytona as well. And then you look over to other entries in GTD. I think Ferrari had the most entries. However, there were a few things that kind of got in the way. I think Inception Racing had a pretty strong race with their Ferrari. They led a couple times. Their car was quite competitive from what I saw. And I think that we have to go back to the factor that they're also kind of new to this as well. That car has never raced at Daytona. Inception Racing, the last time they were here at Daytona was with McLaren. That Inception Racing car is only raced in IMSA 3 times so far as of recording this. So in general, it's definitely there's a lot of learning games going on for Ferrari in the GT realm of IMSA. And I think it's only going to take some time, and then they'll get back up to speed. And who knows, at Sebring, we could see them on top. And I think, as we mentioned before, they're definitely going to be winning races.
Yeah, something that's interesting. I'm just looking at the finishing results from GTD. And this isn't specifically about Ferrari, but this is just kind of the class as a whole. It was a 22 car class, and we had 12 cars not finish. Like that GTD was more of a battle, like more of a battle of attrition than we thought, or maybe than we initially realized. Like you had Magnus Racing losing an entry, you had DXDT catching on fire. I don't even know what happened to Inception. Like Gradient didn't finish this race. I didn't catch what happened there. But like there was a lot of reliability issues that it looks like we saw. And I know some of these were accident related as well. We talked about, suspension, stuff like that. But a lot of Ferraris show up on this with the not running classification. Only is it one of them, which is the AF Corsa, finished on the lead lap. And the only other one that was running was the Conquest Ferrari that was 46 laps down. So, maybe this is just a track that, just wasn't suited to these Ferraris. And I don't know. It's interesting to look at. I don't know if I have any thoughts outside of that's interesting. A lot of DNS.
Maybe not so much a track that's not suited for them, because they won here last year in GTD Pro, but a race that was not going their way for many of those teams in GTD Pro. If I'm not mistaken, Ferrari was the most represented manufacturer in GTD this year.
Yes.
So.
And you know what? The weather conditions in this race were completely different than last year as well.
That's true.
When Ferrari was so strong here last year, much warmer. We're talking. It was cold conditions throughout most of the week, and then while it did come up for race day, quite considerably to the point where these were conditions that the cars hadn't run at all that week. It was significantly different. So maybe the Ferrari just not liking the cooler conditions.
Yeah, it could very well be the case here. Okay, I'm going to finally move it on from Daytona now. We're an hour and 54 minutes into the episode, and it's due time we talk about just something else here. Quick news thing that I want to talk about. So at the Rolex 24 weekend, I'm not talking about the race itself here, but during the race weekend, we got a pretty interesting teaser from John Doonan, let's just say, to the media, indicating that we might see some representation from the Papaya Army and the Blue Oval in the GTP class in the future. Make the connections there. He's talking about McLaren and Ford. these are two manufacturers that we believe are both in the advanced planning stage of negotiations with manufacturers for LMDH chassis, and very well underway at a formal commitment to those programs coming soon. A couple things I want to unpack here. McLaren, we've already talked about in the past. They've been long rumored. They've been rumored since this class, before this class even touched the ground in 2023. In and out of talks since then, pretty much. But as of late last year, we're starting to get more confidence with the fact that they're probably going to be on the grid in the future. Zach Brown, of course, head of McLaren Racing, told Jenna Fryer at the Associated Press that he wants to be in the WEC in 2027 and be in IMSA in 2028. Okay. A Ford announcement, while I'm not 100% in the know about this, would not be surprised if we hear something on this very soon. I would not be surprised if we're not talking about Ford's entry into the GTP/hypercar ranks as the main topic of our next episodes do. We'll say that much. And the main question I want to talk about here, just a little bit of discussion to wrap up this episode, is what this really means for the regulation set going beyond 2029. Right now, we're with a rule set that's going to be with us for another 5 seasons, including this year. And I think there's potential for us to be talking about it beyond even that. Okay, we're talking about potentially for IMSA, Genesis on the ground in 2027, McLaren on the ground in 2028. Don't really know where Ford would slot in there yet. You'd have to expect it would be somewhere around the 27-28 timeframe, though. It's just a little up in the air on whether it's one or the other. I think we're going to be at a point a few years from now where we're going to have to talk about extending these regulations even further. I will also say I would not be surprised if we lose some manufacturers in those next few seasons, from both championships, really. But the addition of these manufacturers, we have 3 new manufacturers coming in. There's 2 questions, really. Number one, what do you do with the top class beyond 2029? Do you extend it? Do you try to make an evolution of it? Number 2, who's really going to get the boot in IMSA if it's necessary? Because we're at max capacity grids already. Stu, you and I have talked about this plenty. Is it most logical to remove an additional class from the championship as we did with the LMP3 class? Might be their only option, to be honest with you, unless they want to start limiting classes or cars in each class. I'm going to leave it at that. I want to get some of your thoughts just to wrap up this episode. Stu, I guess we'll start with you here.
Yeah, I mean, you can kind of hear the footsteps. Those Ford and McLaren footsteps are starting to get louder, right? I mean, we've heard we've seen the news trickle out. They're thinking about it. Oh, they're like seriously thinking about it. And now that we have one of the heads of one of the biggest sports car racing series in the world, talking about these out loud is that's it's something to take note of. So like I said, those footsteps are getting louder. Obviously both of them would be very welcomed additions to both grids. But yeah, it does bring up some questions. First of all, what happens with the regulations? You could see with the success of, bringing in the manufacturer interest, like, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? It's a formula that's clearly working. If we're still seeing manufacturer interest from names like a manufacturer as big as Ford, they're thinking about joining us. We're not talking about like like a smaller manufacturer or anything. I guess McLaren is kind of a small manufacturer, but not in the racing world. They are a big name in racing around the world. So we're talking about 2 really big names here that are potentially on the verge of confirming entries. But there's nothing that we need to change right now. We're probably going to approach a point where we're going to start seeing manufacturers have Evos, right? Like we see this in the GTD classes where a manufacturer, essentially sort of rehomologates a car with a bunch of upgrades, and it's kind of a new car based in large part on the old one.
We've seen
So
that with
I wouldn't be
with Peugeot
surprised
and
if
the
we
9X8 already.
start to see discussions. Yeah, that's true. That's a really good point. So wouldn't be surprised if we see some more of that. What does it do to the top classes in in both of the championships? I mean, I think that answer is a little bit easier for the WEC maybe. There's already been discussions around trying to make track capacities a little bit larger at some of the tracks that they're going to accommodate some additional entries on the grid. IMSA would be a challenging one. I mean, we talked about how it's a 22 car GTD class. I think there's probably a little bit of meat on the bone that could be trimmed there. You could trim back, you could find, 4 or 5, spots on the grid, I'm sure, doing that. I think the thing to be very careful of, though, is, Chris and I, we've talked about this a lot, is that, try to be conscious of sports car racing being to not we have to stay true to what makes the sport tick, and what makes the sport tick are the gentleman drivers and those that are bringing the funding that are able to support a lot of these racing programs, and cutting a class, like the class that would be cut would be LMP2 and IMSA, right? Like that's probably where that discussion would go to. And LMP2 serves a really important purpose in the grand scheme of, sports car racing, and IMSA being an avenue for, gentleman drivers, top notch, the best gentleman drivers in the world, to go and, showcase their stuff in a prototype race car that can go almost as fast when it's fully unwound, if not just as fast as these LMDH cars. But then also for like the next wave of the top class drivers, being able to, cut their teeth in LMP2s at the highest level, and then move on and get a factory ride with a in a GTP or a hypercar class. So it all serves a really important purpose. I guess this is all to say, what would happen? I mean, well, I'll have to wait and see, right? We'll have to wait and see how these bodies manage additional entries, and maybe it won't end up being a big issue. Maybe you do see a manufacturer or two that kind of pull back their commitments, but these aren't discussions that we thought we were going to be having 5 years ago.
No.
Right? We were talking about two of the top classes that we're seeing, were we weren't really seeing double-digit entries apart from a couple of, a few races like in these classes.
6 or 7 cars in IMSA, about the same in the WEC.
Yep. So to be having these discussions today isn't something that I think we thought we'd be having a handful of years ago. So, it's a good problem to have at the end of the day.
Yep.
Well, on my side of the story, I think you guys said it really good, but I got a lot of thoughts to share, and I'll try and make this brief. I'm going to call it. I'm saying that McLaren are going to announce their plans to join the WEC and IMSA by Le Mans this year. And I think Ford has got a really good chance of joining as well. I think McLaren is the next manufacturer, though, to announce a program. I think that's 100% set in stone for me, at least. Where does that leave us? Where does that go for the future? What does the future hold? Now, this is a very big question that I've kind of thought about for ever since kind of these rule sets were kind of announced. It's like, where does this leave sports car endurance racing? How can we let this not happen like the Group C days, when Group C was kind of like, it was really big, and then it went downhill, and then it just like, everything just went downhill. I mean, Formula One came in with, it was just that's a whole other subject for another video, but okay. I think that for me, what I've seen is that the class is growing. That's a fact. We know that is just a fact. Aston Martin are bringing in their Valkyrie in 2025. Genesis are coming into the WEC in 2026 and IMSA in 2027. If McLaren join in 2027 as well, Ford, you got maybe some other brands as well. You also have to consider the fact that there are a few boutique brands and a few privateer entries that are looking to join as well. You have the likes of Vanwall, who are still interested in joining. They claimed that they want to be on the grid in the WEC, but they don't want to get involved with all this sort of thing. With Genesis getting priority, it's just a whole other situation. And so I think the fact is that the grid is expanding. And I think that what's going to happen is that the regulations are going to be extended until a couple more years after 2029. I think that's what's going to happen. We've seen that effect. But I do think there's some changes that needs to be in order. When it comes to IMSA, I think that one thing that needs to be at least tweaked or at least checked back a little bit is that 2,500 road car rule, because the 2,500 road car rule is very interesting. What that is basically it prohibits small brands from entering GTP. So like Glickenhaus wanted to enter in 2022, I think it was, but IMSA, that rule is in place. Now, I think that it would attract maybe some smaller brands like Vanwall to IMSA, but then again, we don't really know if Vanwall will be joining again, but maybe that can be tweaked just a little bit. Like instead of 2,500 road cars, maybe 2,000 road cars to maybe allow the interest of Vanwall or another brand like that to enter the grid. When it comes to the WEC, this is where I see more of a problem, because the problem with the WEC is that the grid is maxed at a certain length, where IMSA has a lot more ability to run more entries. The WEC has limited spaces on the grid because of numerous factors. One of those being that the garage spaces and certain tracks are not allowing for a certain amount of entries. And so that results in a few cars being axed from the grid. Proton Competition, an entry, for example. Lamborghini wasn't allowed because of the 2-car mandate rule for the WEC in 2025, and some other things that can be explained in another section. I think for me, what I see is that with Genesis coming in, with Vanwall wanting to come back, with brands like McLaren and Ford interested, as we've been talking about, the grid is going to expand and there needs to be some changes. And one of those changes, I believe, is for privateer entries and boutique brands to be entered into a different championship. And I think what needs to happen is either two things. ALMS or ELMS allows privateer cars like Proton Competitions Porsche or the third AF Corsa Ferrari into that championship to race. Or WEC has something like IMSA does and has a sort of support series, a smaller support series for privateer entries or LMP2 entries or something like that, to allow brands to race and to give space for the factory entries, which would only be in the main championship. And so if something like that happens, I think the best scenario would be for Le Mans to, instead of allowing the LMP2 entries to race, to allow those privateer entries and those boutique entries, the cars that aren't allowed to race in the full season of the WEC, to compete at Le Mans. So that would be like the Proton Competition Porsche, the privateer AF Corsa Ferrari, the Vanwall, for example. So I think that that's where it should go. I think that hydrogen power is also another factor as well. We've heard about this potential hydrogen class coming in the future as well. That's been integrated into the potential possibility of Le Mans Hypercar, Le Mans Daytona H as well. So I don't really know how that's going to, that's where I don't know if we're going to see that later on in the way. Maybe that affects some of the grid as well in the WEC, maybe IMSA for GTP. But yeah, those are a few of the changes I think should happen across those championships. But either way, I think it's about keeping manufacturers, making sure they don't leave. We've heard rumors that Lamborghini, of course, is potentially looking to exit. Peugeot was maybe another manufacturer that was maybe starting to think like, is there a future for us, considering that they've had their issues? I'm hoping that they stay. I'm hoping Lamborghini stays as well. But I think that these championships are doing a great job. But I think that they need to keep in mind to continue to do a great job, in that they need to continue to attract manufacturers and keep the manufacturers they have, while also not turning away a few brands, like, for example, Vanwall or Isotta Fraschini, who are not able to get into the championship because of certain rules and certain obligations that they can't fulfill. So I think that it's going to be interesting to see how things go. But I'm very confident saying that the LMH and LMDH regulations are going to be extended past 2030, and I believe that McLaren will be announcing their plans to join the WEC and IMSA this year in 2025.
A lot to unpack there.
A lot to unpack.
So here's the main thing I'm going to say is I really, as much as I disagree with it personally, and I've been vocal about it for well over a year now, I don't think there's an avenue for some of the boutique manufacturers at this point in time. Okay, they've been not essentially run out of the World Endurance Championship. You can make that argument if you want, I guess. Well, sure, if you want to make that argument with the 2-car requirement, then yeah, you can say they were very much put in a position where the organizers knew they wouldn't be able to financially continue, and they would drop out of the championship. In IMSA, of course, they haven't been able to enter since the start. I really don't see either organizing body making changes that would allow them back in at this time, simply because they have a big enough problem as it is accommodating these big factory OEMs on the grid. We're at a point right now where if they are trying to do that on top of allowing manufacturers like Glickenhaus, Van Wall, Asada Fraschini on the grid, it would just become way too much. You're adding additional factors in that really they don't want to have to deal with right now. So I don't see them being encouraged to enter IMSA or the WEC in the future. I would love to see something like you described. Maybe there's a place for them in the Asian Le Mans Series or in the European Le Mans Series if they want to enter those. Maybe they get a guaranteed invite to the 24 Hours of Le Mans. Because at the end of the day, that's really what these manufacturers are after. They're not chasing after a World Endurance Championship. They're not chasing after an IMSA Championship. Some of these, well, when I say these manufacturers, I mean the Glickenhauses of the world, the Van Walls of the world. They want representation at Le Mans because they know as well as we do that they're not going to win the championship. They're not going to win Le Mans. But being on track at that level and on that stage means the world to them as a manufacturer. So if there was a future where they could race in some of those smaller championships, I would be all for it if they're interested in doing that. It would be very interesting to see how that all plays out. I'm going to keep it brief and keep it to that right now. There's going to be plenty that we're going to discuss in the future with this topic. It's going to become increasingly more challenging, I think, for these series to sort of juggle with the teams that they have on the grid right now. Stu, you mentioned maybe we can't have a 22-car GTD grid. And to that extent, I would say, well, what teams are you showing the door first? Because right now you've got a stacked lineup of teams right now that it's really hard to look at any single one of them right now and say, listen, you're not up to the cut right now. Sorry, we're not going to be able to get you on the grid. And especially when you're trying to maintain loyalty or respect loyalty that some of these teams that have been with you for a long time, that's going to be a big challenge for them. So we're going to talk more about this in the future for sure. I would expect, you said, Jonah, you expect a McLaren announcement first. I'm fairly confident and would put money down that I think Ford is going to surprise you in the near future. But maybe have a video on the ready for that one, is all I'll say on that front. Anyways, what we gave you here was perhaps the longest episode of this podcast to date as our 80th episode. So I'm going to give you guys the floor one last time if you have any closing thoughts that you want to get out. But apart from that, I think we got enough to call it a show here. Stu, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I mean, to sum up, I said it the other day. I think the Rolex, this year's Rolex 24 in like one word, was just iconic. We had battles, great battles in all four classes. It comes down to the wire. Comes down to in a classic, whether you love it or you hate it, there are people that are going to complain about IMSA's full course yellows and it's manufactured at the end of it. No, it's just different. It's just different. We have to embrace the differences in these two championships. And man, this was a barn burner of a finish for IMSA and this year's Rolex. Great battles across all four classes. It's one we're going to be talking about for years. And, I think I've said it already this episode, like how long until Sebring. It's going to be a lot of fun to see these battles carry on in all 4 classes throughout this season.
Yeah, and bring on the V12.
Oh yes.
Oh yeah.
Well, I think to add to Stu's point there, if we're gonna sum up the Rolex 24 in one word, I would say competitive. I mean, if we look at the grid that we saw today, or as we saw this past weekend, my bad, the 4 main cars of GTP, all in contention for overall victory. That's something we've never really seen at once. I think the last time we really saw that was Watkins Glen in 2023. When Porsche, Cadillac, Acura, and BMW were kind of all in the mix there at one stage. You could argue for other races as well, but I would say this was just the best in terms of the competition on track. We had drama, we had the Tommy Milner situation and Paul Miller Racing and Corvette Racing. We had the drama there. We had just amazing fan favorite entries taking success. AWA on top, for example, Tower Motorsports on top until, of course, the technical thing came up with IMSA. And then, of course, we had United Autosports eventually winning. That's still a feel-good story for them. But in general, just a lot to take away from when it comes to the Rolex 24. And I think for what's to come, Stu, you mentioned, can't wait for Sebring. And I think that there's more action on the way as well, not just Sebring, but this weekend, as of recording this, is the Bathurst 12-hour. Another fantastic GT endurance race over in Australia at Mount Panorama. And that's going to be epic. We have so many cars on the grid, a lot of drivers from IMSA and WEC as well. Later on, we have the Qatar 1812 kilometer, the WEC season opener coming up very shortly. And there's just so much to look forward to when it comes to endurance racing. And I think that in 2024, I'm sure that all 3 of us have mentioned at one point that in 2024, it was a really good season. It was a really strong season across multiple championships. And at the beginning, I mentioned that it was going to be the best yet. And I know that for me, at least I say that at every beginning of a year for racing. But I have to say it again, and I have to say it because I truly do mean it. It is going to be an epic season of racing across IMSA, across WEC, across Intercontinental GT, across all the series you can really think of when it comes to endurance sports car racing. It's just going to be epic. And I think that we're just going to be in for not just the golden age, but as John Doonan pointed it out, the platinum age of sports car endurance racing.
Here we go.
It is now. I know. Platinum age, though, it's true. I think that it really is. But and one final note here. I want to say a big thank you to both of you for allowing me on to this podcast here. It really was a lot of fun. And I hope I can be on it with you guys later on in the future because it's good to talk with you both about what we love, sports car endurance racing, and just the action that we see every time a race comes around.
Yeah, that's what it's all about. And thank you very much for joining us. I think I'll say, just as my closing thought, the one word I would use to describe, I'm sticking with definitive. I think this race is an indication of what we can expect, not just across IMSA this year, but across the entire sports car racing board. We've got plenty of dramatic moments to come, plenty of close finishes to come, and we're going to be here to cover all of it with you throughout the 2025 season. On the Rain Race podcast, at least Stu and I will be chirping and giving our 2 cents on it for as long as we're good for. And I guess that's what you have to look forward to. So, want to leave it at that for now. Thanks again to Jonah for joining us for this episode. It has been a very long but fun discussion of the opening round of the IMSA WeatherTech SportsCar Championship. And as you said, we're just getting started this year. So get subscribed to the channel if you want to see some more of this. We'll be back in probably a couple of weeks' time, hopefully on our traditional Tuesday date, for another episode of the Rain Race podcast, and I hope to see all of you there. Take care.